By the late 90s, Duke Nukem had already cemented himself as one of gaming's most iconic action heroes, and after the massive success of Duke 3D, fans were eager to see what came next. But with Duke Nukem Forever slipping further into development limbo, something was needed to fill the gap. Enter Duke Nukem Time to Kill, which was a bold shift to third person that was every bit a product of its time, and a much needed stopgap that kept Duke in the spotlight while 3D Realms worked on the next big installment of the franchise. In this video, we'll be looking back at Time to Kill to explore its origins, its design, and its place in Duke's legacy.
Looks like it's time to kill.
By 1998, first-person shooters were still ruling the PC. But over on consoles, third-person action games were taking over. Tomb Raider had exploded in popularity, and the PlayStation was the place to be. Meanwhile, Duke Nukem was still largely rooted in the PC scene. Sure, Duke 3D had made its way over to consoles, but you could tell it was built with the PC in mind. So while Duke Nukem Forever kept missing milestone after milestone, 3D Realms needed something to keep the brand alive. And more importantly, they wanted to get Duke in front of console players in a way that felt current. So instead of trying to force another first-person shooter onto the PS1, they turned to a relatively new studio called N-Space. And their goal was simple: to reimagine Duke for the third-person era, and build something that actually felt at home on the PlayStation. N-Space were a pretty new studio at the time, founded just a few years earlier in 1994. Before Time to Kill, they'd worked on a couple of smaller projects, but this was their first major opportunity to handle a high-profile IP. But bringing Duke to the PlayStation wasn't just a matter of porting over what worked on PC. The limitations of the hardware made a first-person shooter tough to pull off. So the team opted for something better suited to the console. The Tomb Raider influence is obvious from the moment you press start. With tank controls, wall switches, ledge grabbing, it all feels instantly familiar. And of course, this was no accident. Tomb Raider had helped define the genre, and N-Space leaned heavily on that foundation as a way to ease players into a new kind of Duke Nukem experience. Internally, the project was even referred to as Duke Raider, a not-so-subtle nod to its biggest influence. The name may have been a bit on the nose, but it shows just how closely the team studied Tomb Raider's design, while figuring out how to reshape it into something that still felt like Duke. There are even a few playful references to Lara throughout the game, fitting right in with Duke's usual pop culture nods, and making no effort to hide where the inspiration came from.
You skanky outfit.
Oh yeah.
Ooh. Laura, is that you?
No.
But while the framework may have borrowed heavily from Tomb Raider, Time to Kill was still unmistakably a Duke Nukem game. The movement was faster, with more of an emphasis on combat. And the tone was well, about what you'd expect.
Who's your daddy?
This game wasn't about precision platforming or intricately designed puzzles. It was about blowing away pig cops with a shotgun and feeling badass while doing it. N-Space put a lot of effort into adapting Duke's first-person arsenal into something that worked in third person. Familiar weapons like the shotgun, RPG, and pipe bombs all made the transition. Alongside new additions such as the flamethrower, crossbow, and the energy weapon. Each weapon has its own feel, and some even feature upgraded variants, like the Super Eagle, or the high-temp flamethrower that added extra punch. You can even manually aim, which, while not groundbreaking, is a nice feature. Beyond just guns, Duke also has access to his inventory, complete with medkits, night vision goggles, and even the jetpack. The jetpack doesn't offer the same unrestricted flight as it does in Duke 3D, but that's not a bad thing. This one has actual physics, and you'll need to actively boost to stay airborne. It brings some welcome flexibility to both combat and exploration, and also gives time to kill an edge over 0 hour, which left it out completely.
To infinity and beyond!
Combat encounters are fast and frequent, with levels designed to keep you moving. And the controls mirror Tomb Raider, so while they take a bit of getting used to, once you settle in, they hold up surprisingly well. Time to Kill kicks things off with a straightforward premise. Aliens are tampering with the timeline, and Duke, well, he's not having it. After a surprise attack on his favorite strip club, he springs into action, chasing the alien scum across history to set things right. It's not exactly high-concept storytelling. There's no deep lore here, just excuses to drop Duke into increasingly ridiculous settings. Whether it's gunning down toga-wearing aliens in ancient Rome, blasting pig cops in the Old West, or storming a castle in medieval Europe, each time period brings its own aesthetic, enemies, and weapons, helping the game stay visually fresh without getting bogged down in exposition. In terms of graphics, Time to Kill holds up surprisingly well. Sure, the character models are low on polygons, but the environments are colourful and varied with a decent amount of detail for a PS1 title. Duke's model in particular looks solid. He's instantly recognisable, and the model does a good job of translating his look into 3D.
I'm God's gift to women.
The animations can be a bit stiff, and there's plenty of that classic PS1 jank, with some clipping and the occasional awkward camera, but for a late 90s console shooter, it's hard to complain. Audio-wise, the music mostly holds its own, but let's be honest, it doesn't reach the heights of Duke 3D. That game was stacked with tracks that slapped, but in Time to Kill, the music tends to fade more into the background. There are some standout compositions. The present-day theme in particular is a personal favorite, but overall the soundtrack feels more functional than memorable. And of course, it wouldn't be Duke without John St. John behind the mic. He's back with the usual bravado, but this time around, the delivery's a bit uneven. Some one-liners hit the mark, others miss entirely, and a few of them are just plain annoying.
I feel good. Looks like hog heaven. Suey!
Stranger still, every time Duke speaks, the background music cuts out, like the game itself has to stop and listen.
Ah. Hey, what can I say?
It's a weird choice, and it makes even the better lines feel awkward. To be fair, some of that might come down to the writing. Not every quip is gold, and a few feel like they were tossed in without much thought. And then there's the game's intro cutscene. It opens with a full-motion video, backed by a licensed song. The Thing I Hate by Stabbing Westward. It's loud, aggressive, and extremely of its time, but also kind of perfect. That said, if you've seen the E3 reveal trailer, you'll know that the intro didn't always feature this music, but we'll save that for another video. At the time of release, Time to Kill was met with a generally positive response. Reviews praised its fast-paced action, varied environments, and how well Duke's personality translated into a third-person format. It wasn't breaking new ground, but for fans of Duke, or anyone just looking for a fun, console-friendly shooter, it delivered. Of course, critics noted the Tomb Raider similarities, but most didn't see that as a bad thing. If anything, it gave Duke a solid new foundation to stand on, while the mainline series remained in limbo. Sales-wise, it did well enough to justify a sequel the following year, though that game never quite hit the same mark. But that's a story for another day. The game isn't talked about nearly as often as Duke 3D, because, well, let's be honest, it's nowhere near as good. But I don't think anyone was expecting it to be. And the lack of a proper remaster hasn't helped its visibility. That said, Time to Kill did get a surprise re-release. On the Evercade. Yeah, the Evercade. If you've never heard of it, don't worry, you're not alone. It's a retro-focused handheld console hybrid that's been quietly building a solid library of old-school games. And to be fair, it looks pretty cool. Still, while it's nice to see N-Space's work get a second life, this isn't exactly the grand comeback fans might have hoped for. No upgrades, no modern enhancements, just a straight-up re-release on a platform most people don't own. I'd really love to see a proper remaster, or at the very least, a digital re-release on modern platforms. PC, consoles, whatever. Just give people a chance to experience these games without having to dig out their old hardware. So, yeah, Time to Kill doesn't hit the heights of Tomb Raider or Duke 3D, but for a PS1 era spin-off, it's honestly pretty solid. It's rough around the edges, sure, but it's fun, it's full of attitude, and it still manages to capture that Duke spirit. There's a certain charm to it that sticks with you, even if it's not a masterpiece. If you've never played it, it's absolutely worth checking out. Time to Kill may not have aged gracefully, but for a brief moment, Duke brought his own brand of chaos to the PlayStation. And while his reign was short, it proved there was still room for the king, even in uncharted territory.
Now that was a good video. Keep watching Revenant Evil, or I'll rip your head off and down your neck.